All right, thank you. And thank you for this nice conference. I'm happy to be here. So similar to the waves that are generated from dropping a stone in a lake, the heart generates pressure and flow waves that travel down the aorta. The wave speed is a surrogate measure of aortic stiffness. The wave speed or pulse wave velocity is a function of both the distance that the pulse wave travels along the aorta, as well as time delays that you can measure occurring in the pressure or flow waves along locations along the entire vessel. Pulse wave velocity is important for assessing cardiovascular disease. For a healthy aorta, you're going to see pulse wave velocity measurements between 4 and 5 meters per second, and this has been shown to increase with age and atherosclerosis. Now, as we age, its previous studies have shown that the diameter tends to increase and blood flow velocities slow down, perhaps except for in the locations of the ascending aorta where peak velocities may have a different behavior with age. However, the impact of these changes on pulse wave velocity is unclear. So the goal of this study was to systematically investigate relationships in healthy volunteers with a wide age range. The parameters included were 40 flow MRI derived pulse wave velocity, left ventricular function, aortic size measured by diameter, as well as flow parameters such as velocity and wall shear stress. The cohort consisted of 100 healthy volunteers, age 46, and spanning from 19 years to 79 years old. They were stratified into 5 different age groups, so 18 to 30, 31 to 40, 41 to 50, 51 to 60, and 61 to 80. Each age group then had 10 females and 10 males. Each subject received standard of care thoracic cardiovascular imaging, 2D Cine SSFP, short axis acquisition for LV function, as well as a free breathing ECG-gated aortic 40 flow MRI with typical acquisition parameters. From the 2D Cine SSFP MRI, parameters of left ventricular function were acquired, such as ejection fraction, end-diastolic volume, systolic myocardial mass, and cardiac output. The 40 flow data was pre-processed, including corrections and aortic segmentation, and then regions were separated for the ascending aorta, the arch, and the descending aorta to derive metrics by these regions in peak systole, so looking at the mean velocity at the time point of peak systole, as well as the maximum velocity, and as well as wall shear stress. Additionally, diameter was acquired from the 40 flow data. Global aortic pulse wave velocity was also derived from 40 flow. So this again started with the aortic segmentation. An automatic centerline was drawn, and automatic platens were placed along the entire vessel. At each location of the planes, the flow waveforms were characterized. I'm just showing a subset of those planes here for simplification, but all about 60 or so planes would be included. And then from that information, you can get the time delays between the flow waveforms at each location. And then we get the pulse wave velocity by plotting the time delays by the length traveled along the aorta. And the pulse wave velocity simply went over the slope of that data. And here I'm showing all the data points. So here's results in a 22-year-old female healthy volunteer. You can appreciate relatively organized blood flow patterns, as well as velocities that In red, we're showing anything over 1 meter per second, so there's a good amount of flow going above that level. The pulse wave velocity that I measured here was about 5 meters per second. So in contrast, a 79-year-old female healthy volunteer, you can already appreciate that the blood flow patterns are not as organized. There's some vortex flow going on during kind of the later stages of the heartbeat. And you can also appreciate that we're not seeing a lot of red areas, so the flow is slower. So the pulse wave velocity here is about 10 meters per second. Looking at the entire cohort, increased pulse wave velocity did correlate with age, as expected. And we're seeing a strong correlation with coefficient of 0.76. That's indicated over there with the red arrow. Let me go back for a second. So I actually didn't see a relationship with gender. Increased pulse wave velocity was correlated with a decline in cardiac function, and here I'm showing an example for stroke volume. And in this particular case, the coefficient was minus 0.29. I saw relationships with aortic diameter along the entire vessel. And increased pulse wave velocity was associated with reduced flow parameters, and I'll discuss this in two sections. So the first part of the table are these mean velocity and mean wall shear stress measurements, and we found a significant relationship in all these measures along the entire vessel. And then looking at maximum measurements, I saw increased pulse wave velocity was associated with reduced flow parameters in the arch and descending aorta, but didn't see a relationship in the ascending aorta. In conclusion, for this large group of healthy volunteers with a wide age range, the 4D flow detected the expected relationship with aging. So as we age, the aorta stiffens, pulse wave velocity increases. But here I'm showing increased pulse wave velocity was also associated with aortic dilatation, a decline in cardiac function, and reduced flow parameters. So it's certainly critical to use age-matched controls to detect abnormal pulse wave velocity. Perhaps gender is not as critical. I think it might be important to look specifically in the younger age group here, because in the past there's been some differences found there, so that's kind of to do. All right. Thank you so much to my collaborators, and thank you.